Welcome to the Central Mountain Small Business Development Center Forum Series number 4, and we're going to talk about the power of balance today. The Central Mountain SBDC offers free consulting, also free training or low-cost training, and also access to money and capital, either through state resources, federal resources, and even working with you locally. Next slide, please. We have storytelling series and pivot panels, and the great thing about this on our website or YouTube channel is that you can see like-minded businesses and hear about their stories in our area of Chaffee, Lake, and Park counties. Next slide. We also have blogs, and actually the panelists today in each forum series write a blog and share that early before the webinar and then present further ideas at these webinars. And so we encourage you to visit that website page and enjoy their blogs, and they will be up indefinitely. Next slide. We also have some great new training events coming up. Actually, Stephanie Amend will join us for the Innovate the Future with Tech Business Opportunities, which will be held September 17th from 10 to noon. And that's to really cultivate a tech resource area in our 3-county area. And then we have a Leading Edge program in collaboration, working jointly with West Central SBDC Center. And it will be running September 10th through October 29th. There is a fee of $250 for this Leading Edge program. But if you email me at info@centralmountainsbdc.org, you can ask for a scholarship and we can look into covering your fee either fully or partially. And then next we have an Entrepreneurial Valley workshop in conjunction with Northwest SBDC centers. And the great thing about this is it's done through the Colorado Lead School of Entrepreneurial Business Development. I'm actually going to be attending the session myself. And I look forward to seeing you there. Next slide. Stephanie, I just wanted to emphasize, who's speaking, and you'll hear about her consulting experiences today, but she also is an expert in regards to tech. And so she's done these various recorded training sessions about SBIR programs, and you have access to them. In your handouts, this whole PowerPoint is offered, and it has hot links to all these sessions. And I'll be sending this out to you after this recorded session as well. Next slide. And I'd like to introduce our speakers today for learning how to have balance in our life. First, we'll hear from Heather Barron. And I know I do it every time. And Heather will talk about demystifying daily practice. And then Stephanie Amend will join us and talk about choosing your balance. And finally, Katrina Pappenbrock will talk about leading from a feminine perspective. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Leanne, who's going to offer our first poll. Potentially. So if you could answer, how balanced do you feel right now? And the choices are perfectly in balance, work is in balance, but life not so much. Life is in balance, but work not so much. It varies daily. Or are you kidding me? How could anyone be in balance now? So if you could share your answers.
Right, Jamie, looks like we're still getting some votes coming in.
Okay. Leanne, I'll let you take over with an analysis of the votes.
All right. Looks like we've got 17% life in balance, work not so much, 50% saying that it varies daily. Of course, we have 33%. Are you kidding me? How could anyone be in balance right now? And nobody said perfectly in balance.
Well, that's honest, I think. We were all honest. And next slide. It is my great pleasure to introduce Heather Barron, and she's going to talk to us about demystifying daily balance. Hi, Heather. And I have to say, I was working on this presentation. Actually, I came back from vacation and ended up working 10 and a half hours on Sunday, which was insane. But so I thought about, here we're talking about balance and I'm working on a Sunday. And I was talking later with my daughter, who also lives in the area. And I'm like, I'm still really struggling with this work-life balance. And she looked at me, and she's now a mom herself, and said, Mom, your work-life balance has never been in balance. And so knowing that, it made me so grateful that I recently hired Heather to help me with my own journey of finding my voice and finding my way. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Heather, and I'm sure that she can offer us some insight on finding balance. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for that introduction and for this opportunity. The 33% of you, are you kidding? How could anybody be in balance right now? I know a lot of the world is feeling us in that space. And so this presentation partially is going to be just introducing some ideas of, how to think about daily practice, maybe in a new way. Maybe you've already got that dialed. Nobody said they are completely in balance. So maybe there will be something in this for everyone. But first of all, and primarily what I'd love for this presentation to do would be to bring us a moment of levity, so that in this moment, we might tap into a feeling of greater balance. So we're going to start by just coming into this moment and by grounding together. I'd invite everybody to just, wherever you're sitting, or if you're at a standing desk, to feel your feet grounding. If you are sitting, to just take a nice deep breath. And all of us, let's all take a nice deep breath in and do an audible sigh out. Make it loud and dramatic if you're able to do that wherever you are right now. And we're going to do another one of those. What happens when we do that audible sigh is it drops us down from being all up in here to feeling our voice dropping down. So let's do one more of those and really feel your voice dropping down into yourself. In that space, I invite you to close your eyes. If you're sitting in a chair, to let yourself feel held. To put down your concerns, your to-dos, and your stale beliefs just for a moment. They'll be right there waiting for you to pick them up again. Take another nice deep breath. And on the exhale, feel yourself coming all the way into yourself, into this moment. Breathing with each breath a little more space for possibility, for newness, and for new ideas. And I'm going to invite you to take 3 more breaths as I walk us through these 3 thoughts. I belong here. I belong here in this moment, exactly as I am, exactly as it is, exactly as the world is right now. I belong here. I am ready. I am ready for the ideas that are going to be shared in this webinar to affect me in the way that they need to, in a way that can bring greater balance and freshness of thoughts, inspiration, and maybe even a little bit of joy. I am ready. I am not alone. I am on this webinar with other women who are seeking to have greater balance, seeking to understand our sense of power and grace and place right here. I am not alone. I invite you to take one more breath, and when you're ready, to open your eyes. Now, what I've walked you all through took just a few minutes, and it is something that in itself could be a daily practice. It's a daily practice I use before I give a presentation, whether the technology works seamlessly or we hit some hiccups like we did a little bit today, to take that moment to become present, to remember that I belong here because I exist and I'm in this place, that I'm ready for whatever there is coming my way, and that I'm not alone, either because I'm with myself and I promise not to abandon myself, or because I know that all over the world, women like us are working to find our place and to share what we have to share and to bring into being what is ours to bring into being. And so this is an example of a very simple daily practice. And in the blog that I wrote and also in the resources at the end, there is a 4-minute video of me walking through a very similar reflection. You can click on it and it's already there for you. You can listen to it anytime you want. And obviously all over the internet, there are lots of great practices. But let's talk about this idea of daily practice. So the idea of demystifying it is for those of us who feel like we could not possibly add one more thing to our plate right now, or if you're a perfectionist, if I'm not going to get it right away, then why even bother? It's a waste of time. Or if we are addicted to being busy all the time and just don't want to even think about something like that. If you are interested in daily practice, it's usually because what we're already practicing is not working. Let's talk about that. The definition of practice, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to just the theories relating to it. So if I could see a raise of hands, which I can't, but just in my work with coaching clients, there's a pretty common feeling that we all know that we should have daily practices. That S word, should. Oh, I should do this. If I just did this, my day would go better. If I just did this, I could have more peace. I'd be less prone to explosive anger. I would be a kinder parent, a better partner. I would feel better in myself. I should do a daily practice. So this idea is theories, right? But practice is a physical thing. So we're going to do some practicing today. And just instead of just talking about theory, we're going to be looking at that together and doing that. But before we dive into that, I want to think about this idea of balance. So I think a lot of us think about balance as sort of like the scales. And in one scale, we have a certain amount of things. And we think if we just put something else in the other part of the scale, we're constantly trying to balance. And this can feel like being a pendulum. This can feel like constantly being out of sorts if I can just add more time with my family in this one and less time in work, or, the work one for a lot of us, Jamie included, and me, tends to be a little bit more weighted this way. And we think about it as scales. Daily practice that you choose to practice can create a different sense of balance. And what it does is it creates the foundation on which we are balancing. So think about, if you've ever done yoga, you do balance postures. And this is a great daily practice that you can have, just to throw that out there, to do a balance posture of feeling that your foundation is what you're standing on. It's not trying to be balancing these scales where you're going back and forth, but the foundation that we're creating that then is going to hold us while we hold our life. And so thinking in terms of balance that way, a daily practice, whether it's one thing or a series of things that you do on a daily basis, creates a stable foundation to stand on. Now, again, in theory, we all know that that is worthy of time and effort, but what gets in the way of it? So thinking about yourself each day, you are practicing things every day. You have habits that you know don't serve you, but you know they came in as survival mechanisms at one point and we haven't figured out how to replace them with something else. So thinking in terms of what we're already practicing, when we're trying to take on a new practice, it's going to feel wonky and messy and very not perfect. If you've ever been to a practice with little kids playing soccer, they call it practice, right? And this is the beginning of every soccer player that has ever existed to the greatest height started in this place where they're playing amoeba ball. They all follow the ball around. They don't know their role and it's really messy and they're practicing something that is not going to work in the long term. But the coach is there to constantly adjust what and how they're practicing. So if you're feeling wonky and out of line and like you're just putting fires out, you're just following the ball that's moving and constantly reacting to it, then you probably long for a different experience. And I know 50% of you said that, you know, sometimes it depends on the day as to how balanced I feel. 33% of us are following that ball. We're just running after that ball. And until we start to put something in place, 5 minutes, then we will only be doing that. We will continue practicing the thing that does not work. And so we have to get honest with ourselves. Why? Why do we want to practice something different? And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at our why and our what. Because although we know there are a lot of shoulds, I should meditate every day. I should run every day. Whatever your shoulds are, we want to become conscious of what those are, because that's not necessarily what we need to be practicing. Maybe there's actually something else that we long to experience, a quality that would help us to feel our wholeness more. And by doing a practice for that, even 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, we could practice our way into greater calm, practice our way into more stability, practice our way into being present, practice our way into being more joyful. So I know most of us don't need any more to-do. We don't need another to-do. Most of us right now, especially, need more rest. We need more calm, and we need more joy and inspiration. So in thinking as we move forward, we're going to go through a little process to figure out what is that one thing that could help you feel your wholeness right now. And in the work that I do, we always start from a place of wholeness. We may not feel whole right now, but we start from the place that wholeness is what we're meant to experience. And so we start peeling away the things that get in the way of feeling the wholeness that is innately ours. And so that's important to know. We start from the place of, I am enough already. I don't have to add a practice to be more enough. But a practice will replace the things that get in the way of me feeling enough, that get in the way of me feeling a foundation on which I can balance securely. So may I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to run through these really quickly. You can see these in, you're going to get the slide deck so you can go back through it. But you can also read the blog that goes along with this, and it elucidates this a little bit more. But in simplifying what the right practice is for you, we want to answer these questions. You may remember these from elementary school, the who, what, where, when, why, how. But we're going to focus on why and what today. The when, where, how, and who is something that you can then take after this and figure out what you need to put in place for your why and your what. May I have the next slide? Our why. So we already talked about this a little bit. We are already practicing something. If we feel out of balance, what we're practicing is the opposite of balance. So we want to figure out why we want to have a daily practice, not because we should, not because it'll make us a more illuminated or awakened human being or spiritual, make us more spiritual. What is our why right now? And with how different things have been over the last few months for almost every one of us, it's really important to get clear on our why. What do we want to practice? Well, that's what comes next, but we need to know why we want to practice something differently. If we are tired all the time, if we are uninspired, if we cannot access our joy on a daily basis, regardless of the storms that are raging around us, that innate joy that is deeply inside all of us, if we can't access that, then we want to start practicing something that gives us access to that. And that'll be our why. So let's move to the next slide, please. Now let's get to our what. So that little guided meditation that we did at the beginning, the reflection, can get you ready if you want to do this. If you're not on the webinar or you're just looking at the slide deck later, because for whatever reason, you're too distracted to do this right now, doing a little bit of grounding and getting to that place of listening to your heart, not thinking and analyzing, what should I be practicing? You've probably already done plenty of that. That's the theory that the definition was talking about. We want to drop into practice. So I'm going to guide us through just a moment of listening to what our heart may have to say for us. And this is a practice that I love sharing with Lori Benson. She walked us through this in a couple of webinars in the past. It's just that sense of asking our heart, what do you have to tell me? So let's go ahead and close our eyes. And I'm going to walk us through that. Take a deep breath. I invite you to put your hands over your heart, just for fun, humor me. And ask, heart, what one quality do I need more of in order to feel my wholeness now? What one quality would add to a greater feeling of balance and wholeness right now? And take a moment just to listen. If there's a lot of fear that rises up, maybe calm or stability or presence. If a feeling of not enough time comes up, maybe a feeling of grace, of pause, of there being enough. Whatever seems to rise up that feels out of balance usually has an inverse quality. So I invite you to open your eyes now and look at the list on the slide. There are a few that I've listed that I've noticed over time in myself, in my own practices, but also with clients. If one of these qualities speaks to you more than any other, and you may need to do the rate each quality 1 to 10, you may need to list your own qualities that you're looking for. Whatever process you need to go through, narrow it down to just one quality, because the idea of learning a new practice is to keep it simple. The little 5 to 7-year-olds show up and they run around. They work on fitness. They don't necessarily work on ball handling skills right away. They start simple, and the coach starts simple. So pick one quality, just one quality, and that's going to be your focus as you try to find the right what your practice is going to be each day. May I have the next slide, please? And I just noticed back on the last slide, we don't need to go back, but the 1 to 3 qualities, when I list, I start with 3, but that's because of my personality type. I like to have choice. If you find that you work well in that way too, you don't have to narrow it down to just 1. You can have 3 and then try to find a practice that brings at least one of those 3 into your day consciously each day. So then in thinking about practice, there's some very practical things that you can do for your who, what, where. I'm sorry, not your what, we already did that, but your who, where, when, and how.
It looks like we might have lost Heather, we're always challenged, I think, lately, especially with so many visitors in our valley, that the internet can be episodal. So Heather was summarizing, and this slide really captures how you can define your where, when, and how. And again, on this slide deck, the beginning of her intro slide, there was a blog link, and she walks you through step by step on how to do this process. So next slide, please. Heather has an amazing amount of resources, and she was kind enough to share some of the resources that she's had to work with clients a lot lately with the COVID pandemic. And so those hot links are there. And we will open up at the end of this to Q&A. And the one thing we did troubleshoot with technology today, we had a practice run. We said if any of us dropped off because of the internet, that they would call back in. So I'm sure that by Q&A, Heather will have rejoined us, and you can talk to her further about it as well. Without Heather here, I'm going to say thank you, Heather, for sharing your insights. And next slide. Oops. So we're going to switch over to Leanne again and do a poll, and the question is, have you ever felt balanced in your life? So not necessarily today, but ever have you had that feeling of being balanced in your work life? We'll take a few moments to answer this, yes or no. And Leanne, I'll let you do that summary when you have the results.
All right, Jamie, it looks like we've got about 80% of the vote in, and we've got about 60% saying yes and about 20 saying no.
Okay, so we're going to switch to the next poll and next slide. That's a tricky for Leanne to do because she's operating both. And if you said yes, so I think it was 60% that said yes, they've had that moment of feeling balanced. Did you feel that that was due to a choice that you made, or do you think it was just coincident that you finally got balanced? So yes, if you feel like you had a choice in that. And Leanne, I'll let you share the results.
Okay, sounds good. We're still waiting for votes to come in. All right, with over half of the folks voting, we've got 100% on yes.
Oh, well, that's good. So next slide. Heather was just sending me a text. She will be joining us again. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Amend, and I've had the great honor of meeting Stephanie actually through the Small Business Development Center. Stephanie has been a tech counselor for the Boulder SBDC Center, and then reached out to us once we opened our center last August, and has recently become a counselor for our SBDC Center here, and not just sharing tech wisdom, but also her small business entrepreneurial experience. But Stephanie, like we all do in the Valley, wears many hats, and her other hat is on whole health, and so she can speak very wisely about balance, and she's going to share her ideas on choosing your balance. So Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. It's really great to be with everybody, and I appreciated Heather's introduction to kind of bring us into a mindset of this is practice. You know, nobody necessarily gets this right always or ever sometimes, but our goal is to give you the tools to help you become a little bit more in control of how you're feeling, especially during these challenging times. And as Jamie mentioned, I do have an altered life compared to what we're talking about today. But what we're talking about today and what I do in whole wellness and in consulting clients in attaining whole wellness really kind of stemmed out of where I had come from a very unhealthy relationship with work and with my own personal relationships and physical activity and all these things that we have in the mix of bag that should be balanced. And I started my own company about 11 and a half years ago and found myself going down this deep, dark hole of feeling very out of balance, but just because so much was going into my business. And I found some tools and some things happened in my life and some choices were made that kind of pulled me back out. And then I started looking at my own clients that I'm working with, and many of them are startups, very high achieving people, very driven and intelligent. And I saw how many of them were so worn down, how they felt so many things were out of their control. And I constantly hear, even though I'm there to talk to them about a government contract, I'm turning into somebody who's telling them how to make their life healthier and how to feel better. And so that just progressed into becoming a trained well coach. And so I'm still balancing my business. I have a daughter, I have another business, I'm starting another entrepreneur thing, I run ultramarathons, and often people ask me, how do you stay balanced? And so I was excited to share this with you, and I wanted to just give you that background so that you kind of understand where choices can take you. So I'm going to kind of walk you through, as you saw my blog, I personally believe, and as you all just kind of proved, I guess, during our poll, that we feel that if we have found balance, it was through a choice. But it can be really difficult to kind of sift through everything. So next slide, please. Let's talk about how we do this. So what is the biggest factor in having a balanced life? And I put balanced life in quotes because I'm going to start moving away from balance and moving more into wellness and well-being, because balance kind of has a connotation about it sometimes that I want to move away from. But the biggest factor in having a balanced life is, if you can guess, next slide, please. It's you. And you already, probably guessed that from Heather's discussion and your poll, but you are the biggest factor in successfully finding balance. Next slide, please. And the way that the first step in discovering and really owning that it's you is you need to upgrade your belief system. Now, I'm coming from a consulting background. My husband says I have a very type A personality, so you may not find me meditating in the corner very often. So I might have a different tone, but I think we're all saying the same thing on this webinar today. And my tone is, this is your choice. I want you to do something about that. So the first thing is to upgrade this belief system. If we live in a belief system that's not serving us, then we need to get out of it. So the first thing is, balance is not a static thing. Balance is not something that feels the same all the time. It's not equal all the time. And it ebbs and flows with the priorities and the goals that you have. And it's a state of well-being, and balance is unique to you. It shouldn't be the same thing as your neighbor, your friend, your sister, your mother, whatever. You are the only one. If you feel, as Heather pointed out, put your hands on your heart. Do I feel balanced? Not the should, the nasty should S word that Heather talked about, but what about me? Like, okay, I work 60 hours a week, but that works for me. I feel okay about that. Don't be judging. And that near-term goals are a driver of well-being. So this is a lot of people have these big goals that are too nebulous to put their arms around. They're really long-term, and as a wellness coach, we talk about kind of narrowing these goals down. So we're going to talk about near-term goals. And here's where we move from balance to well-being. So balance, it's kind of, we think about scales, we think about all these elements that just all has to feel right and even. I really want to talk more about balance actually being a sense of well-being and a state of well-being. Next slide, please. So if you were to kind of look at what is wellness, there traditionally are 8 dimensions of wellness. And so these are the things that we often think about need to be balanced in order to feel good. I call these kind of 8 areas of priority in our life. And so you might be gravitating to a couple of these and say, oh yeah, you know, I feel kind of out of whack in my physical because I'm not able to go do exercise, or social because, you know, I haven't been able to see my friends lately, or whatever the case may be. If you're looking at this, I want you to kind of start looking at the top 3 areas that you're gravitating towards that are the most important for you. All of these things are important to feel well and healthy, but there's probably for you and your unique situation at this moment in time, 2 or 3 that really kind of bubble up. So I want you to take a look here and maybe write those down. And these are your priority areas for wellness. This is what we're going to focus on. Instead of trying to balance 8 circles in your life, we're going to kind of narrow it down to 3. Next slide, please. Next, I want you to think of a near-term goal. And near-term, I feel like my husband and I were saying just yesterday that I feel like next week is forever from now, and I can't plan that far. So near-term is going to be relative for you as well. So you may have something you just want to accomplish this week, this month, but let's not go out further than 6 months. So if there's a goal, and it could be small, I could just say, I just want to be able to like feel like my house is clean, or I want to pitch to my boss or my business partner this next big idea, and I want to be ready for that, or whatever the case may be. You know, I want to implement and start becoming vegetarian or something. So kind of look at these 3 main areas of your life, and let's talk about a goal. Do you have one for your family in the near term, one for your work, one for your health, something I haven't mentioned yet? Just kind of take a minute to think about, what would you like to accomplish as a goal? Okay, next slide. Let's kind of put this together. Now, again, I come from a business background, so you're going to see a lot. What I'm trying to do is overlay what I do with a lot of my clients. I'm trying to overlay ideas that kind of resonate with a business mind with a wellness mind. Now, what I chose is, as a goal here in the middle, one near-term goal, we'll say it's a marathon. And I'm going to give you, I went through this exercise after I had a baby. I was still managing my company, of course, and I wanted to do an ultra marathon again. And I had 10 months from when the baby was born to work up to 50 miles while managing everything else in life. So I kind of went back, and the example is kind of based upon my personal experience going through this. So my top 3 priorities tend to, when I look over time, tend to always be something physical, social, and occupational. Like, these are the 3 things that if they are in a good spot, then I feel balanced. But if you put a goal in the middle of these, sometimes something will pull you one way or another. So you can imagine that if you're training for a marathon, that the physical training might start pulling that balance out of whack. Well, here's where the choice comes in. You know, you only have so many hours in a day. That's going to pull you. You need to be okay with that decision. You need to set up the other bubbles of your wellness to support that decision. Otherwise, don't make a decision to do a marathon if you feel like it's going to cause you to be out of balance, or you make a decision to balance it in other ways. Next slide. So, of course, I'm going to do a business thing here. So, I love this old school SWOT. And if you've never seen a SWOT chart, it's a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what I'm aiming to do here is to achieve balance by putting the power in my hand to make decisions. So decisions I'm going to make about this near-term goal how can I use those decisions to achieve balance in my life while I'm trying to achieve this goal, while not letting those bubbles get out of whack? So SWOT analysis is a great way to do anything with your business. So if you have a business and you're trying to make a decision, go revisit your old school SWOT. But I kind of like to apply it to personal things too. So when I think about, okay, I have physical, occupational, and social bubbles I really want to make sure are balanced. The other bubbles are important, but if they get out of whack, I don't feel it as much. So I'm going to do this marathon. What are the strengths that I have? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And so I'm going to give you this example, but I'd highly encourage you to kind of like draw out a SWOT, you know, if you're taking notes and or when you pull out these handouts, and kind of do your own SWOT and goof with it. There's no right answer. It may not make any sense to anybody else who were to pick it up, but it may lead you to decisions that will help you find balance, and that's my goal here. So you know, my personal situation, I had a supportive spouse as a strength, and I previously had run ultra marathons, so I knew what I was getting into. That's a strength. My weaknesses, though, is that I felt guilty about spending time training. You know, I felt guilty about the fact that I wanted this to be my goal. I'm a new mom, a business owner, blah, blah, blah. I really had to look inside of, why am I guilty? This is something for me and it makes me feel good. It's a goal. So, you know, that was a weakness that I had to overcome. And of course, I was very out of shape. The opportunities I had, though, is that the baby really liked to run on the move. I had a flexible schedule with my work. So kind of looking at my bubbles, you know, with my supportive spouse, my work kind of worked out. Cold weather was a problem, and I tend to sometimes overbook myself. So looking at these things, I said, okay, how do I use my strengths to overcome weaknesses and my opportunities to overcome a threat to still feel good in my 3 bubbles while I'm trying to achieve my goal? Next slide, please. And this is kind of where I just started, you know, journaling out of this, you know, and I really do love journaling. I could probably do it more, but again, if I were to put my priorities out there, that bubble doesn't necessarily come to the top, but that's me. That's just me. So, you know, I handle my emotional bubble while doing my other bubbles and working through those states of well-being. But I would recommend, if you're doing this for the first time, kind of journaling this down. You know, find your areas of wellness, find your goal, develop this SWOT quadrant, and then let's put it together. So what strength do you have that you can overcome a weakness, and what opportunity do you have that you can leverage to overcome that threat? And so what you should only have left is strength and opportunity for yourself. So you need to take actions. Again, decisions or actions. Take an action to align those areas of your life to achieve well-being and achieve that goal in a state of well-being. And be honest with yourself. Like, don't compare to other people. You know, Jamie was saying she worked 10 hours. You know, that's a day. And if it felt terrible, then take that terrible feeling and flip it around and say, okay, how can I change that for next time? But if it didn't feel terrible, working 10 hours may not be that terrible, Jamie, speaking to you, for that day, right? So I want you to all have a lot of compassion for yourself in that. But it is a choice, and hopefully these little bits and pieces help you walk through that choice. So next slide, please. And here's where I came to when I kind of did my own analysis, and I just kind of like laid it out there. Okay, my spouse is happy to watch the baby. I'm going to do long training runs on Sunday mornings when he isn't working, and this is going to be my time, and I'm not going to be guilty about that. But because my baby likes to nap, I'm going to do my weekday training runs while she's in the jogger. I have a flexible schedule. I can do that. And if it's warm outside, you know, that's great. I can do my other work other times of the day. I've done this before, so I can do this again. You know, I know how it feels. I know what went right. I know what went wrong. And I will say no to other commitments that don't support my goal. So there might be other bubbles of my wellness that I will have to say no to. They all don't have to be equally big or small. You know, that is my decision, because I want more time to hang out with my family. My work, my family, my training are the three most important things right now. So if I have to say no to something creative or intellectual, that is a choice, and I need to be okay with that. And if I'm not okay with that, then we need to revisit some other things to figure out really what really needs to be important here. Next slide. So this is my last statement before my resources slide. So what a lot of people, and I put this in my blog, like a lot of people have been told, oh, I have to have all these things in place to feel balance. And you don't need to have scenarios in place. But I believe regardless if you kind of use the analysis I do or the other many varied ways to find balance and feel well, truly what it comes down to, this is what you need for yourself. You need patience with yourself. You need to be able to trust in yourself, trust in that intuition and that feeling. Be flexible with yourself. Find people who support you and who are there to continue to support you as your goals change, as your well-being changes. Have kindness with yourself. You know, be kind with these decisions. And this may not all work out, and you know, to achieve 100% balance 100% of the time, you know, life throws curveballs. I don't know if it's actually possible. And finally, have acceptance. Have acceptance for what balance is in your situation at this point in time, and do the best that you can to make the decisions that are most ideal for you in this moment, at this time, with what you're trying to achieve. And really just trust again that you're going to do what is best for you, and you're going to do it as best as you can, as often as you can. And, you know, again, I'm putting the onus on you to make that decision. I think my next slide is the resource slide. And these resources might seem a little wacky for what I was just saying, but I really leaned heavily on a couple of these throughout my, you know, progression, my dual hats that I wear. And you can also follow me on social media. And as Jamie mentioned, I do have this whole other world where I help tech companies. And so my coaching site is actually here. And so I do a lot of coaching, but it's not just for tech entrepreneurs, but I love working with entrepreneurs in general. But I love working with anybody who feels out of balance. So I appreciate all you listening, and hopefully it resonated for some of you. And that's it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Stephanie. And you reminded me of a mantra I had that I actually created in a workshop with Jenna Fingston, who was also a presenter last session. And it was, your acceptance realizes abundance. So thank you for that reminder, Stephanie. Next, I'd like to introduce Katrina Papenbrock. I can never say it right. Papenbrock. Is that right?
Yep.
I know her as Kat. And she is our support for rural opportunities with the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. But she has this incredible story and background in her leadership development processes. And I think acceptance is part of that too, Kat. So I'd like to have her share her thoughts about leading from a feminine perspective. But you'll see in the Power of We sessions that we always start out in more of a mindfulness, meditative panelist and speaker. And then we evolve to really taking what this means in business, not just personally in your life, which is very important, but also in business. So Kat will share her thoughts on that as well. Thank you, Kat, for joining us.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you so much for the opportunity to get to chat with all of you today. And Heather, my gosh, thank you for that grounding. I think we all need more of that these days. And Stephanie, I think a little bit of mine is going to build into that piece that you talked about, with always recognizing that support is a key factor of that balance piece too. So this presentation is going to be probably like, let's say 50% personal, 50% practical. I used to joke when I was doing some consulting work around tourism that I'm definitely a warts and all speaker, because I think it's really important to learn, you know, what you've learned from the bumps in the road and when you've tried something and you've failed, and what you take forward. So it'll kind of be a 50-50 split, kind of with under the broad theme of leadership. So as I mentioned in the blog post, is that I was really groomed to lead in one sense of the word from really, really early on. My family and I are immigrants to this country. We moved here from Germany in 1980. My dad was in the longwall coal mining business, and you know, from day one we were just, it's that kind of stereotypical German piece, right? You lead, you succeed, you get straight A's, you're team captain, you're good in sports, you volunteer all of your time. And you know, my folks modeled that, and my sister and I certainly moved that way as well. The thing was, throughout all of that though, and I think it hit me maybe for the first time when I was in high school and I was voted most likely to succeed, and I'm like, I don't even know what that was. I wanted to be class artist. But you know, kind of went off to college, went off to grad school, and had an initial career. I actually moved out to Denver for grad school, and worked in museums with the Denver Art Museum. I had this wonderful opportunity to set up the lab at Belmar when that neighborhood was being established. And at the same time, starting to realize that, you know, things just weren't really tracking. They weren't feeling right. Like, yes, I was in these leadership positions. My resume looked fantastic. But I remember one performance review with my old boss, and he's like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I couldn't answer it. I curated a question that I thought he wanted to hear, but it just didn't really feel right. And so after about 8 years in that realm, I had enough and sort of blew it up. My husband at the time and we had friends that lived here in Ouray, Colorado, which is still home for me now. And I had always had a love and a passion for food, and decided, hey, you know, I'm tired of working for other people. I do have this entrepreneurial mindset. We were both really, really intense adventure sports aficionados. And so, you know, Ouray was his dream town. And I was like, yeah, that works for me. Let's go open a taco shop. First sort of leadership challenge right there. I definitely was built for leadership of that, what I call, I think it's on the next slide, actually, Jamie, that extreme self-reliance, right? Where you basically feel like everything's on you, right? All the decisions are yours to make. You have to basically move forward with everything. All of the faults are yours. And if you can't figure it out on your own, then you're basically not a leader. And I think the more boxes you check, whether you're a woman, an entrepreneur, an immigrant, living in rural Colorado, you know, all of the above, it just kind of centers itself in your system even more. And adventure sports as well, right? You're always taught, like, you need to figure out how to get yourself out of any situation. And so moving to Ouray, you know, basically, I didn't even know. We moved here in 2009, and I opened up a farm-to-table taco stand. It was the bottom of the recession in a seasonal tourism economy. I had no clue what that meant from that very sheltered world of museum work. And also wasn't aware, because I hadn't sort of reached out or hadn't done a lot of research or touching base with other entrepreneurs ahead of time, that, you know, even though somebody tells you, hey, we form these deals on a handshake, it's not going to protect you in the long run, right? So through that, I mean, the business itself was actually really successful. It was loved. It's really funny. It's been closed for 10 years, and I still have people coming up asking when I'm reopening the taco shop. So that feels good. But on that side, the leadership was successful, right? But on the other side, you know, after 2 years, my marriage had ended. The partnership, one of them were close friends. We're no longer friends. That all blew up. I was having landlord issues and just didn't feel enough because of that extreme self-reliance mindset of leadership, that because I didn't know, I didn't pursue any legal rights to what I should have. And so I shut it down, was looking at restarting, didn't have the cash flow for it. And I laugh, you know, when I'm working so closely now with the SBDC, and in my other job worked so closely with them. It's like, I know, I should have reached out, and I didn't even know that they existed at that point. So basically I was in a position where I wanted to restart and just couldn't, and jumped right into another leadership position. At that point, the chamber in Uray was going under a critical restructuring. And I thought, hey, I'm going to apply for this, right? I've got a strong background in nonprofit management, done this before. I've gone through transitions. I've set up new nonprofits. And my partner basically warned me. He said, look, this is a small rural community. He's like, it's not just nonprofit management. It's personal, it's political, it's professional. All of these things are going to be combined. And I certainly learned that really quickly. When you take on a leadership position in rural Colorado, you learn very quickly on the job, and you're also humbled. You're also surrounded all of a sudden by all of these different voices. And if you sit and listen and all of these amazing experiences, you realize that there are actually people around you that can teach, that can help, that can assist. And so the first couple of years that I was there, you know, the support network was really my board and my staff, which were just absolutely amazing. And then as we started to transition into a much more expanded program that was kind of controversial to the community, that's where kind of the next step came up. And basically at the same time, the Colorado Tourism Office had launched an inaugural program called the Colorado Tourism Leadership Journey. And I was lucky enough to get into that first class, and the organization was able to support that. And it was one of those moments where, you know, you kind of take a chance, because it was a group of 20 people, and I'm a super introvert. So I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about sharing this stuff, but I can't say enough about finding some sort of structured program. And I think that's going to be a little bit on the next slide as well. Whether it's a formal program that you pay for, or whether it's just a network of peers where you guys read and learn together, if you have access to resources and you kind of share ideas, you start to frame what leadership means differently, right? You start to look at different models, maybe things that you identify in yourself. You know, I was definitely the super individualistic leader, right? And started to realize that that wasn't it. You also need a massive support team around you to lead effectively. And also, it's not what maybe you grew up with in terms of leadership, that there are these qualities that you may have that you think of as vulnerabilities that actually end up being your biggest strengths. And so being able to go through that program was really incredible. One of the other things, it was basically a year-long program. We met every 3 to 4 months, did a lot of work on our own. And again, that journaling piece that Stephanie had mentioned, I mean, if there's a chance to do that, if you read or anything like that, that was pretty powerful. And I still go back to my notes these days, like 3-4 years later, just to kind of check in and see where I am. The other component in that I had finally realized was the power of mentorship and just peer-to-peer connections. You know, a mentor doesn't have to be a formalized situation. It can be somebody who works in your field, but it's somebody who's sort of gone through a similar experience or a similar workflow that you have, that, you know, you can just basically bounce ideas off of. And mentorship was a strong component of that CTLJ program. And I remember at the beginning, we got to kind of pick 3 or 4 from a list of folks who had volunteered to be mentors to the first class. And on there was just this colleague of mine that just intimidated the heck out of me, because she was so capable and just so amazing. And lo and behold, she ended up being my mentor. And it's been one of the most amazing professional relationships I've ever had in my life. So if you can, definitely seek something like that out, whether it's from your local group or whether your industry group. One of the other things that was really cool throughout the program, I mean, we did sort of traditional things like you know, understanding your personality a little bit more. We did a really in-depth Myers-Briggs assessment, and that to me was really fascinating, was figuring out how, as a super like off the scale introvert, can you actually lead teams where you're usually the quieter one in the room. And then also basically, oops, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. And then aha moments, right? They did a really cool job of sort of themes. So if you have a little leadership group maybe that you get a part of, if you're not part of a structured program, one of my favorite ones that I still reflect on a lot was actually in Salida and Buena Vista. We got to go down, and the whole theme of that experience and sessions was taking risks. And for a long time, when I had moved into the chamber position, I had kind of stepped out of the adventure sports world, right? I used to be a really high level, like class 5 whitewater kayaker, and had left that behind and was like, well, how does that fit into my identity now? And it was this really cool convergence of like, well, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a leader, you build that resilience. And there was like suddenly this like parallel path between experiences that started to really connect things in my brain, and also realize that like, hey, in adventure sports, you're never going to put yourself out there where you're willingly putting yourself in a life and death situation. So in your leadership position, or a calculated one. So in your leadership position, why are you doing the same thing, right? Where you're driving yourself to death every single day. And slowly that idea of that self-reliant leadership, of that leader who never burns out and always has more to give, started to shift a little bit. And then the other pieces in terms of working with a community that really came out was, the vulnerability piece. I realized that was my secret superpower. I always thought that it was, my data analysis and ability to retain information. And instead it was being vulnerable and being able to connect with people, through that sort of warts and all approach. And then that gave me a sense of empathy, right? Sometimes when you're in a difficult leadership position, you have issues, kind of relating to people and understanding where they're coming from, especially when you're in a conflict scenario. But that really made me realize that was actually one of the pieces that helped me move forward. So within that, to the support side, and that's the last part of this presentation. So let's pop over to the next slide. I realized that, oops, sorry, that was my vulnerability piece. I apologize. So one more forward, please. There's that support piece. Once you kind of break out of that idea of super hyper self-reliance and leadership, you start to build a team around you. And we did this in my old organization. As we were going into this like extreme reorganization. And the thing that was really cool from the organizational perspective was that my personal qualities were actually already reflected in where the organization wanted to go, right? Responsibility, all of those kind of core values, authenticity, et cetera, gratitude, acknowledgement. But then it was like, okay, this isn't on me anymore. So who do we bring in to help? And this list is by no means exhaustive. You can kind of create your own, but this is what mine looked like and what I tend to look for whenever I'm looking for support around a new project or in my new job with OEdit now too. So first and foremost is your cheerleader. This is your person that is going to be able to message whatever you're saying and make people think it's just the most amazing idea ever. Helps if they're a little extroverted and love to talk. And in my old job, I had just a wonderful colleague who was with me from day one for the 9 years that we worked together. And she just pushed me. And every time my little data brain got too crazy, she was like, all right, this is how we translate it. And this is how we get people excited about it. And I was so lucky to have someone where no matter who she talked to or in what situation it was, in this case, it was, marketing and promoting Ouray as a responsible tourism destination. It was just brilliant to watch her talk and connect. And then that person, sort of there's another one in there, the social media was, and it may be on the next page, but, as we've seen in COVID now, online is more important than ever, and being respectful in messaging and having that tied to your internal voice, whether you're an organization or just a person or an entrepreneur. She was also our social media and online who was able to translate that excitement and that authentic voice over into that platform. The researcher is always somebody you want to have on your team because data-driven decisions, if they match with your heart and they match with your authentic voice, those are going to be the best ones that you can make. Those don't always overlap in the same person. So this is the person that loves to dig down into the research, give you comparative studies, give you other examples, and really put the hardline numbers. And then when you have a goal, they'll make sure that you're sticking close to what you're wanting to achieve, or give you a heads up ahead of time if you need to shift course. Your big picture planner in your group is the one that really takes that 30,000 foot vision, that really looks at everything that's happening on the ground for whatever you're wanting to do and says, these are the variables and this is where I think we could go if we're looking at everything cohesively. This is the person who's looking 5 to 10 years down the line. So that's a super important one. And a lot of times, like in our small rural communities, you would love to have this person be head of your community development department or something like that. But, most of the time we don't even have the budgets for that. So look for someone in your community that's always, thinking really big and broadly and forward. Your politician, and this can be in any scenario, right? And I always joke, like, yes, we have to have one, right? You need to have somebody, especially if you're working in community work, but even as an entrepreneur, right? To have a connection with one of your local elected officials is just so important, whether it's a city council member or a county commissioner, just to be a voice back and forth, and also explain to them how things are going on the ground and what you're planning on doing, so that if there are policy changes or if there are things that need to happen, that they're able to kind of advocate and kind of speak along the same message as what you have. Next slide, please. Your local champions. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, this can kind of overlap with your industry partners locally. So it can be residents, it can be your local business owners, but they really understand what the stakeholders in your community or in your business environment really worry about, right? They have a close connection to them. In Uray, for example, you know, we had some unbelievably engaged retirees who were just totally on board with where we were going and talking to their community about it. And it was just really amazing because they could speak to these people in a way that we just really couldn't approach, and knew the networks that they moved through. One of the things there, though, is especially in our small communities, we joke about the same 10 people, right? They're probably over leveraged, so don't make them a worker bee, just have them be somebody that, you know, gets to reach out in sort of their social networks. The financial wizard and the realist, to me, kind of go hand in hand. You know, there's always a capacity to what you can do, and there's always a cost associated with it. So sometimes I'll combine these into one. You know, I know as we were transitioning in my old organization, or right now, my goodness, in COVID, with everybody's, you know, whether it's your business cutbacks that you've had to face, or state government or local government, you know, it's like, here's what we want to do, but here's what the numbers and the finances are actually going to let us do. And here's the value of every dollar. Here's how we leverage it. You know, here's where you need to pull back. And that's super, super important. And then that realist as well, if you can have somebody who has sort of a softer touch, because if you're sitting around a table of peers or community members and everybody has these amazing ideas, just being able to scale it back into what's actually possible. And then last but not least is the cat herder. Originally, when I used to talk about leadership teams, I always forgot about this position until I realized that tended to be me. You always need somebody who's going to kind of oversee the leadership team in sort of a quiet way, but just make sure that people are staying sort of in their swim lanes where they're comfortable, that they're being acknowledged, that projects are actually moving forward. And that's one of the places where, you know, oddly enough, in my new position, that cat herder position continues to work, because right now, as we move forward, it's all about collaboration and building capacity together and trying to not duplicate work, because it is so tricky. So it's always looking back at, okay, how can we be a little bit more efficient? How can we make sure that we're communicating between all of these different stakeholders and people? And at the end of the day, too, I still remember one of the biggest things that I learned, which was so weird at the age of almost 40, thank you is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do. You know, whether it's to people who are working with you or somebody who's just trying extra hard, just an outreach, whether it's a note or an email or a quick phone call, that seems to go, you know, a little too long before we do that. Next slide, please, which I think will probably be my resource slide. So, you know, the beautiful thing is that, you know, I've gotten to move into this space where I'm getting to work with businesses and communities from the economic development perspective, which my old job definitely set me up to do. And, you know, kind of taking those strategies and all of that leadership learning moving forward to try to find that balance. Definitely don't succeed every day. Every day there's a new challenge to overcome. But in this resource list, I just have a couple of my favorite things that just seem more true now than ever. Bill George's Discover Your True North was the first book that we read for the Leadership Challenge. And some folks in the class I know thought it was a little dry or maybe a little outdated. But that was one of the ones that I continue to go back to challenge myself to figure out, you know, am I slipping into a different style? Are my goals still the same? And so if you're a reader, they've got a shorter version too, where it's just like kind of a workbook. But it's a really cool thing to start with. You know, for those other introverts out there, Susan Cain's Quiet is just amazing. That was actually one of my new leadership team members, Joey at the SBDC, recommended that to me. And I've been re-listening to it on audiobook and just really love it. And then as we move forward, there's a really beautiful session that we put together with Martin Carcassonne, who's a professor at CSU, that talks a lot about what we're dealing with right now and some of our problems as leaders and having hard conversations. And it's this wicked problems webinar. There's a general one that we did through our regional calls, and then one that's really talking about the mask issue right now that delves into it a little bit more deeply. But it talks about this sort of cognitive dissonance that we have and how to approach things, you know, from a really empathetic perspective and drive effective community or even, you know, business solutions forward. And then last but not least, because we all need magic in our lives and time to just sort of escape. Anything by Neil Gaiman, but I recently just reread The Graveyard Book, which is from this sort of kid's perspective. And, you know, it's a little dark, but at the end it's like super, super light. And it's just a reminder to, you know, take care of yourself. And in that case too, leadership comes from support all around him. So with that, I am all set and I'll head it back over to Jamie. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kat. And I thought it was interesting, cat herders.
Yes, go figure.
I'd like to have Stephanie and Heather. We think we got her back to join us for some Q&A. And if you have questions, please put them in the question box. And also, we invite you to share any stories that you'd like. We always want to open it to that. Leanne, I think we probably don't have questions yet, so I thought I might just go through and ask the panelists something. Why, if anybody has a question, please put that in the Q&A. Heather, since we lost you a moment ago, and I had actually Sunday morning, I had a great session with Heather. What have you found either personally or professionally with the clients that you've worked with COVID that seems to be a reoccurring thing that's just swifting us out of our balance, you know, just almost shocking us?
Yeah, it's not going to be a surprise that uncertainty really throws most of us off. You know, that I don't think we realized how much we have put in place to create as much certainty as we can, whether that's a routine or whatever. And right now, I mean, even with this, you know, just technology we're so technology dependent right now. How do we stay in that space of, okay, being present when all of a sudden the technology decides not to work? And a lot of us are having to use technology in new ways we've never used before. But that sense of uncertainty is making it so people feel untethered, unanchored in ways that maybe we've never experienced before, unless you've faced incredible trauma, because trauma does that. You know, it unearths anything that you have as an anchor, things that you depend on. So right now with uncertainty, even having that sort of a 5-minute anchor each day, finding one thing, whether, again, if it's, you know, you need more joy, it doesn't have to be something that comes with a heaviness. And I think that's why that word should, if we can stop shoulding on ourselves as much as possible right now, then with the uncertainty, we do what we can each day. But to have that one anchor of something that either is infusing joy or inspiration or something that's lifting right now, I think that sort of a practice can really help, because there's so much heaviness being sort of forced on us just by our circumstances.
Yeah, that's very true. We actually, I had a lot of shoulds yesterday in our conversation.
Yes. Anyone who's a perfectionist, which a lot of people think all women have some level of that, we should on ourselves a lot. And so we can just become aware of how often that word is in our vocabulary and start shifting that sort of paradigm.
Yeah. Stephanie, you have worked with your own clients, and then I know you've been very involved with Salida with COVID, and you're a mother. So what are some of the things that you have thought that have just kind of universally knocked us over?
I think being flexible with decision making. So I feel like at my book club last night, I said that I felt like I'm the symbol for infinity. that I tend to go on this way for a decision and I go back this way. And if I can kind of meet in the middle of that symbol for infinity, then I feel like I'm in a pretty balanced place. And that just being flexible, that just because of the decision I made last week doesn't mean I have to hold to that decision, because we're thinking about preschool from a very personal perspective. And a lot of my clients, both in their business and their professional lives, feel like, oh shoot, well, I told everybody this is this decision I was going to make, and now things have changed, and how do I go back and tell them, here's my new decision? Is it okay to like change for a new decision?
Mhm.
And so my response and for myself is just saying, we have to, everybody's saying this, correct? Like, we all have to be flexible. Yeah, we do. It's true. So kind of coming back and saying decisions will ebb and flow, and it's okay to do that. And I feel like people might be fearful for changing these decisions, but I think if you were to really speak to people on an individual basis, they feel the same way. So there's no reason to feel fearful on changing course.
Mhm. And Kat, I have been so thrilled with the collaboration that last November it was actually started with OEDIT and the Rural Division and Small Business Development Center rural areas, and Startup Colorado with the rural focus. So we actually combined our 3 different organizations, both in the public and private sector, to work together. And we didn't know COVID was coming. And boy, did we get this huge course on how to collaboratively work together with government funding and resources. So Kat, I've seen you really rise as a leader. What has been the silver lining in COVID and in leadership, and what has been some of the obstacles?
Sure. Well, I think the silver lining, you just put it out there. I have never seen this level of kind of collaboration and communication, you know, whether it's between the crew that Jamie just described. It's the collaboration for rural economic wins, which is awesome.
Yes.
So powerhouses there, and just seeing the passion and dedication and the talent, right? I mean, that's kind of what I talked about in the talk too. When you're in rural, suddenly you realize that you are so close and so surrounded by people who are just incredibly powerful. The other silver lining, and this goes to something that when I used to be in like a negative phase of community planning, I was like, you know, it's in some of these communities, it's going to take a crisis to pull them together, right? I mean, you see it over and over again. We're really good in a crisis, but we're not good when things are good. And now all of a sudden you have an international crisis, right? And it's been really beautiful to watch communities and businesses, you know, really start talking through a shared hardship. One of the best stories that one of my team members, Greg, who's our rep on the eastern part of Colorado, shared last week, were the 2 highly competitive towns of Haxton and Holyoke, who basically put together this whole campaign where community members were pooling their stimulus checks to help local businesses, and how, you know, both chambers were working together, and it really made a difference, you know. And so if that's something that we can somehow find and continue, you know, obviously this is going to be a while for us to work through, but, you know, if you can kind of continue that shared strength once things are good, it's just better for everyone.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting for me, in COVID, there's been the fallout and the shock and all of those things, but there has been this huge collaboration of we are all in this together. And also it blows my mind how many new startup businesses have reached out to us, because things have changed so drastically. All these new ideas of how to address online sales and how to offer services you never thought of offering has really been kind of the silver lining for me working with small businesses. Ending with balance, I would like to we'll go through one more time, probably in the same order, but I'll start in finding balance. I think my big discovery yesterday was that should word. That, you know, I always think, oh, I'm just going to figure out how Heather talked about the teeter-totter. I always think, you know, if I can just get it right, and I'm just missing something, but I almost have it. And I do remember Jenna Fingston again in yoga when I had lost my late husband. I'm now happily married again. This was years ago. I went for grievance counseling with yoga. If you could imagine, I was reaching at straws, pretty down, and she got me in this contortion, and I was balanced. I was very, you know, I had it. And then she said, breathe. And I just completely went off of balance. And I said, breathe. So I, in that enlightenment, working with Jenna, and that you have to breathe. And Heather, letting go of the shoulds. I think those two things, in realizing it's okay that you go out of balance and back in. It's awareness, it's acceptance, and choice. So those are my sort of recent observations and long-term observations. Heather, do you have a contributing ending to this? And then we'll go to Stephanie and Kat.
You know, I think starting from that place of enough is a good balancing point. When we're shitting on ourselves, we're always going from that place of something's missing, I'm not enough, there isn't enough. And certainly there are a lot of things that are saying we don't have enough right now. But if we have that food and that shelter and we have our breath, then we actually have enough and we are enough. And starting from that point where we're not, our brain isn't throwing us into constant crisis, but we can actually see what is enough, that we are enough, and start from that place. And then now, what is mine to do today? What is mine to do right now? Not all the should. What is mine and what can I do? And then moving in that place and coming back to that place constantly really seems to help me, at least. So,
Stephanie.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Heather, of, you know, what is mine, and really embracing that this is the choice. And I come back to what's the next best thing. So instead of, you have all these things around you bombarding you and you feel like they're coming at you, to kind of stop for a moment, reflect it back out and say, what is the next best thing that's for me? What choice can I make that would help my well-being? And those things are important. So you probably have 20 million things to do and it's all running through your brain, but just taking a moment to just take a breath and say, okay, what's the next best thing? And to Kat's statement, like, who can help me through this? You know, what do I have around me? What resources do I have to help me do the next best thing, to help me make a decision and a choice that will make me feel good with the outcome and not make me feel like I'm just like getting bombarded again and, you know, not doing what I really truly feel is best for me.
Kat.
Yeah, I mean, almost verbatim, that's exactly where I was going as well. My really big one, my big learning moment has been sort of a balance between routine and then leaning into help. You know, I'm definitely somebody who gets overscheduled really easily. So I think it was Stephanie who talked about overscheduling. Yeah, permanent situation. And just stop, take a moment each day to lean in, ask where you need help. And then also, you know, and this is very personal for me, the routine is so key just to mental health. And for me, that looks like every morning, no matter what, it's between 6:30 and 7, there's time for yoga or meditation. And if I don't, it's like my whole day falls apart, right? But on those days where that happens, it's like, okay, that was just today, right? And that's the other piece too, is like, we've got all of these like long-term uncertainties, but it's also like, let's just focus on today. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to go through a few slides and have you stay on, but thank you for your contributions. Next slide, Leanne. It is great. I'm so excited about these upcoming sessions. And here's another example of technology. I did the slideshow, and then we had a tech crash right before we got on. And so we had to switch it to Leanne, who is using Google instead of PowerPoint. And here's the slides all wacky doodle. But we're going to talk at our next session about the power of your voice. And Whitney Connor Clapper, I actually had a great opportunity to meet her just this month because she came to Heather's wedding. She is the Senior Global Activist Manager for Patagonia. And she's going to talk about how to use the power of your voice in not only activism, but in your company to make a difference. And then Adrian Reef and I had this long conversation because his partner, Nanzi, I never can say her last name right, so I'm not going to. But they have this new regenerative business and innovation process. And I just found it so inspiring during the startup week with West Slope that was held in the month of July. And so I invited him and Nancy to come and speak. And Adrian, who's also a local and very successful entrepreneur here in Salida, was like, do you have any men on these Power of We's? And I told him he would be the first. So I'm very excited to have him involved. And then Lori Benson and Heather Barron have been huge contributors to this whole Power of We series. And she'll be talking about a project that she's been working on with 100 Voices. So that's September 21st. And next slide. Then the next session is Lori's dear friend, Catherine Yassari, who's actually a journalist and a storyteller. But she's been on Oprah and all National Geographic. She's done incredible worldwide projects. And so she's going to share the art of storytelling. Heather's going to engage us in the stories that we tell ourselves, which I'm certainly guilty of, and how to evolve or change those stories if you choose, which ties back to Stephanie's comments today. And then, that's where Lori will talk about the 100 Voices. And then next slide. Lastly, we have Janessa Gans Wilder, and that's actually another dear friend of Heather's. She is the founder of Euphorides Institute, and she's also a former CIA analyst. And she's going to talk about paradigm shifts. I think if we haven't all realized, our old paradigm really has changed, and in every way, how we do business, how we figure out school, how we figure out society. Lots of things have changed very quickly. And she's going to talk about these transformative new paradigm shifts. And Delaney Keating with Startup Colorado will talk about paradigm shifts in methodologies for small businesses, kind of a part 2 of Adrian's talk. And then Jenna will bring kind of a more metaphysical approach to embodying paradigm shifts so that we embrace it and move through it and not only survive, but thrive. So thank you, next slide, for attending this forum series, and we'll hope that you attend the upcoming ones and also that you tell your friends and colleagues. So thank you so much. Have a great day.